Alright guys, so what has been happening on college campuses around the United States over the last couple of weeks has been absolutely insane. So I touched on this in a recent video a couple of days ago, but in this one I want to give you guys a full breakdown on what has been happening. How did we get here? What are the current updates? The media, the political freak out from all of this, the smear campaign against these protesters. We're going to try to touch on everything here. So to start us off, let's focus on Columbia University, which I think has been the flashpoint of a lot of this. So this is an article from the Times of Israel back from last November, okay, roughly a month or so into Israel's genocidal war on the people of Gaza. They say here, Columbia University suspends Jewish Voice for Peace and Students for Justice in Palestine. The school cites infractions culminating in unauthorized events that included threatening rhetoric and intimidation, and they say that these groups have held events accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza. Okay, so already we're running to a little bit of an issue here, right? You're banning Jewish Voices for Peace, okay, an organization that's calling for a ceasefire, an organization that is against genocide in Gaza, and you're banning them, I guess, partially under the guise of violating university rules, and then also under the guise of addressing this violent anti-Semitism that is erupting on college campuses. So, okay, again, already running into a little bit of an issue there, that you're cracking down on Jewish peace advocates in this effort to crack down on anti-Semitism. But also, I mean, notice the byline here. Included threatening rhetoric and intimidation, but then they say they've held events accusing Israel of genocide. Well, which one is it? Accusing Israel of genocide is not threatening or violent rhetoric. That's just a statement of fact or opinion or whatever you want to say. It's not violent to criticize the government of Israel. It's not anti-Semitic to criticize the government of Israel. And so we move on here, but I also want to mention, just real quick at the top, so that we don't have to get into this bullshit back and forth, at any protest that has ever happened, okay? I don't know if you guys have ever been to one, but there are always going to be some people on the fringes who do crazy shit, who say crazy shit. That is always going to happen. But the core of these protests has always been end the genocide in Gaza, end the illegal occupation and apartheid and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, get a ceasefire, and address some of the problems at these specific universities, okay? That's been the core of this protest. So to try to spin this or frame this, as we're going to get to here, as a protest movement that hates Jewish people, completely absurd. But so what has been happening? Well, we talked about this. The Columbia president, the president of the university, basically sent the NYPD to arrest a bunch of these protesters who had set up an encampment, okay, a sit-in protest, if you will, on one of the lawns on the university's campus, okay? Now, apparently, I learned this later, this is supposedly one of the lawns that is, like, usually designated as a protest site if there is ever going to be a protest on campus. So basically, what you had here is these students go out to protest against a genocide, okay? They go and they set up this encampment here as a part of that protest, exercising their First Amendment rights. And then the university president caves to pressure, or maybe this is just what she believes, that these people are out here calling to genocide the Jews. And she declares, not the NYPD, the president of Columbia declares that these people are dangerous, okay? And then suspends many of them, dozens of them, suspends them from the university, and then calls the NYPD to go and charge them with trespassing. Now, the issue on top of, obviously having these people arrested, the issue of suspending them goes deeper than just like, a temporary slap on the wrist punishment. There are reports that because of their suspension, a lot of these students aren't able to go to classes. Some of them aren't able to get into their dorm rooms to even access their own shit, okay? Not to mention the fact that could, if it stands, be a massive stain on their academic record, right? So many different issues that go into that. And I just want to emphasize, the NYPD, when they were making these arrests, even the NYPD, that loves to arrest people for completely meaningless reasons, even they admitted, yeah, these people were entirely peaceful. There was no threat, okay? They were saying what they wanted to say and going about their business. So the university president had them arrested. Now, it didn't stop there, because the protests continued even after those arrests. In fact, they got larger. And then you had professors, you had educators, staff, faculty at this university who started to join the protesters. Okay? And now they're arresting NYU faculty members at a different school, right? Because again, these protests are not just contained to Columbia. They've actually now spread to multiple different universities across the United States. And again, at some of these universities, they're arresting their own faculty, not just the students, their own faculty. This one was at NYU. And so this is a map of where some of this is spread. MIT, Emerson College, Tufts University, Columbia University, Barnard College, New York University, that's NYU we just looked at, the New School, the University of Michigan, Washington University, Vanderbilt University, UNC Chapel Hill, and I'm sure it's not going to stop there, okay? So if anything, the crackdowns didn't work at all. They did the opposite of what your intended, of what your intentions were, all right? If anything, this just aggravated people more and brought this issue much more to light. Now, we have a statement here that's actually from some of the groups or individuals who are helping to organize the protest on Columbia University's grounds, right? And so in this, they do address, okay, if there have been anti-Semitic slogans, and I'm not talking about from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, but whatever other issues, anti-Semitic statements, or any acts of violence, even though I haven't really seen credible reports of that, they're basically throwing that to the side and saying, we don't acknowledge actual anti-Semitism. Okay, that's not part of our organization. We condemn that. We condemn any forms of violence. So let's read a little bit of this statement here. They say, we are student activists at Columbia calling for divestment from genocide. We are frustrated by media distractions focusing on inflammatory individuals who do not represent us. At universities across the nation, our movement is united in valuing every human life. Our members have been misidentified by a politically motivated mob. We have been doxxed in the press, arrested by the NYPD, and locked out of our homes by the university. We have knowingly put ourselves in danger because we can no longer be complicit in Columbia funneling our tuition dollars and grant funding into companies that profit from death. More on that here in a minute. As a diverse group, united by love and justice, we demand our voices be heard against the mass slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. We've been horrified each day watching children crying over the bodies of their slain parents, families without food to eat, and doctors operating without anesthesia. Our university is complicit in this violence, and that is why we protest. We firmly reject any form of hate or bigotry and stand vigilant against non-students attempting to disrupt the solidarity being forged amongst students. So you've had people who have joined the protest who are not necessarily students, and they're protesting around Columbia's campuses, okay? They say Palestinian, Muslim, Arab, Jewish, Black, and pro-Palestinian classmates and colleagues who represent the full diversity of our country. We have been peaceful. We follow in the footsteps of the civil rights and anti-war movements in our quest for liberation. And here are the demands, okay? Number one, divest all finances, including the endowment, from corporations that profit from Israeli apartheid, genocide, and occupation in Palestine. So basically a BDS move here, right? Complete transparency for all of Columbia's financial investments, amnesty for all students and faculty who are disciplined or fired in the movement for Palestinian liberation. Completely reasonable demands. Okay, first off, let's ask this question. Why in the fuck are U.S. universities investing in companies that are complicit in Israeli apartheid or occupation or genocide? I mean, this was an example from a different college. This is from Cornell, okay? Apparently they're investing in Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. I'm sorry, why are our tuition dollars or the tuition dollars of these students being used to invest in weapons manufacturers? Not to mention weapons manufacturers that are complicit in an ongoing genocide, but just weapons manufacturers at all. It seems like maybe with this being the reality, okay, that people deserve to have transparency and to know where the money they're giving to school is actually going, and that maybe there should be a ban on any sort of complicity with a genocide. Or just fucking don't invest in Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. I mean, Jesus Christ, what are we talking about here? This seems like this should be the bare minimum. And that's one of the core demands of the Columbia student protesters, right? So keep this statement here in your mind as we move on to the unhinged reactions from the media and a lot of our political leaders here, right? So that was their statement. We condemn all violence. We condemn all forms of anti-Semitism or bigotry in any direction. We are peaceful. These are our goals. Okay, that was their message. Now we move on to Joe Biden. So as you can see here, Jewish Voices for Peace, who is an organization that I've met many of their members. They've been leading some of the protests that I've been at, and they say this is a deeply disturbing response from the Biden administration. Okay, so what did he say? He says, while every American has the right to peaceful protest, I guess is what he meant there, calls for violence and physical intimidation targeting Jewish students and the Jewish community are blatantly anti-Semitic, unconscionable, and dangerous. They have absolutely no place on any college campus or anywhere in the United States. And echoing the rhetoric of terrorist organizations, especially in the wake of the worst massacre committed against Jewish people since the Holocaust, is despicable. We condemn these statements in the strongest possible terms. So, listen, if you were to read this completely out of context from everything else, of course, if there are people who are saying, anti-Semitic, truly anti-Semitic things, or they're threatening Jewish people, or they're engaging in violence against Jewish people, of course, everybody would condemn that. Of course. But the issue here is that these protesters are being called anti-Semitic for saying things like, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, right? That's one of the core chants. In many circumstances, you have people in the media, you have some of our politicians who literally just believe criticizing Israel is the same as criticizing Jewish people. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not kidding. We've covered countless examples of this over and over and over again. So that's the issue here, is you're the president of the fucking United States of America, who, by the way, is not doing so well right now with young people, your support and complicity in a genocide being one of the top reasons why, and your response to mass protests from young people against genocide is not to condemn the genocide, okay? Is not to condemn any of the genocidal statements we've heard from Israeli politicians, from US politicians, from members of the media. No condemnation for any of that. But you're going to come out and basically try to push the idea that the core of these protests is anti-Semitism, is hating Jewish people, is echoing Hamas rhetoric, or whatever the fuck. I mean, it's despicable. It's exactly what Jewish Voices for Peace just said there. Now, again, in terms of the hypocrisy of coming out immediately, multiple statements, condemning, as pointed out here by austerity is theft, multiple statements in 24 hours, and yet can't bring themselves to talk about shit like this, right? So you can talk over and over again about protests on college campuses, and they're using offensive slogans or whatever the fuck. Meanwhile, what was the story I just talked about yesterday? They've uncovered mass graves inside of Gaza. Any condemnation of that? Of hundreds of bodies that have been found in mass graves in Gaza? No comment on that. Okay. And we also have these comments from tons of different Republicans over the last 6 months. This is a great article here from Prem Thacker. He says, Michigan Republican Representative Tim Walberg, I covered this on the channel at the time, declared at a town hall that the U.S. shouldn't be spending a dime on humanitarian aid in Gaza. Instead, it should be like Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Get it over quick. Any statement on that? Joe Biden, a sitting U.S. member of Congress with actual legitimate power, unlike a student protester, real power that's actively being wielded to vote to send billions of dollars to Israel. Any comment, any condemnation on him calling for Gaza to be nuked like Nagasaki? Nothing on that. Another one. Quote, we are in a religious war here. This is Lindsey Graham. I'm with Israel. Do whatever the hell you have to do to defend yourself. Level the place. Level the place. Tom Cotton, okay, Republican from Arkansas. As far as I'm concerned, Israel can bounce the rubble in Gaza. He went on. Anything that happens in Gaza is the responsibility of Hamas. Hamas killed women and children in Israel. So everything's on Hamas. Israel has no agency, regardless of if they're dropping 2,000-pound bombs on a refugee camp, okay? Regardless of the reporting on the programs like Where's Daddy, where we know that Israel explicitly, intentionally waits for AI-identified Hamas guys to go home to their families so that they can then blow up the entire family. And they think an acceptable ratio in these kinds of strikes is 20-1 for a low-ranking militant, 20 civilians to 1. And then for a high-ranking militant, apparently it's acceptable to kill over 100 civilians, right? So that's the baseline that we're talking about here. But suddenly, or somehow, every single death is the fault of Hamas. Okay. Now we also have here Republican Max Miller, all right, who was angry with Rashida Tlaib. He refused to recognize a Palestinian state, calling it, quote, a territory that's about to probably get eviscerated and go away here shortly, as we're going to turn that into a parking lot. Calling for Gaza to be turned into a parking lot. A few days later, Miller's colleague, Brian Mast, remember this guy, the guy who wore the IDF uniform to the halls of Congress, wore a foreign country's military uniform to the halls of Congress, okay? And he went on to say, any assistance should be slowed down. any assistance, because I would challenge anyone in here to point to me which Palestinian is Hamas and which one is an innocent civilian. It should be absolutely be every effort made to slow down any perceived assistance that's going there. I would encourage the other side to not so lightly throw around the idea of innocent Palestinian civilians. He said, I don't think we would so lightly throw around the term innocent Nazi civilians during World War II. So a twofer here, comparing Palestinians to Nazis, and then also saying, really, there's no such thing as an innocent Palestinian. If you think I'm exaggerating, he then went on to say, these are not innocent Palestinian civilians, okay? There's more infrastructure that needs to be destroyed. There will be more that gets destroyed, right? This is after we had a historic bombing of Gaza, to the point where there was more civilian infrastructure destroyed in Gaza in this short period of time than during the World War II Allied bombing of Dresden, okay, which was at the time widely known as one of the most bombed out places in the world. He thinks it didn't go far enough. So we have here Republican Andy Ogles, who vilely dismissed protesters who took issue with their taxes going towards killing children. And here's what one of the protesters said: I've seen the footage of shredded children's bodies. That's my taxpayer dollars going to bomb those kids. His reply: you know what? So I think we should kill them all. I think we should kill them all. In response to a protester who said, I've seen footage of shredded children's bodies. So you guys get the point, right? No condemnation of that. We got a list of dozens of different statements from elected officials, people with actual power that they wield. And Joe Biden is more concerned with policing the slogans on college campuses. In fact, our whole government is more concerned with that. Congress passed a resolution, just I think it was last week, condemning the slogan, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. So they passed a resolution, overwhelmingly by the way, to condemn a pro-Palestinian slogan, and then just like a week later, they passed $26 billion to go to Israel to continue genociding the Palestinians. Okay? This is where we're at in this country. Just giving you guys a full recap here. We also had John Fetterman. He, of course, came out and said he fully agrees with the White House. These protests, why are you putting that in quotes, John, are anti-Semitic, unconscionable, and dangerous. Add some tiki torches and it's Charlottesville for these Jewish students. Do your job, he's talking to the president here, and resign or find somebody who will. I mean, listen, to compare people who are protesting a genocide, people who don't want their tuition money going to weapons manufacturers, comparing those people to actual, legitimate, open and proud neo-Nazis that were marching in Charlottesville. That's where we're at. A Democratic senator is comparing pro-Palestinian protesters to actual neo-Nazis. He thinks the only difference is that these protesters happen to not be carrying tiki torches, right? You look at what was being chanted at Charlottesville, right? What were some of the things that were being said there that made it a neo-Nazi march, that made it a truly anti-Semitic demonstration, where that was the core of it, that was the purpose of it, right? They were going around chanting, Jews will not replace us. Yeah, that's fucking anti-Semitism. And as I've said many times before, anti-Semitism is a real thing. It is a real existing thing that has existed arguably throughout most of human history, okay? And when you pretend as if pro-Palestinian people, or people who are critical of Israel, or people who are protesting a genocide, are the same as actual neo-Nazis, you are erasing the meaning of the word anti-Semitism. You are making it impossible to fight against real anti-Semitism. And again, it's also deeply anti-Semitic to conflate all Jewish people with the Israeli government. That's anti-Semitic, okay? There are many Jewish students who are leading some of these protests. Again, groups like If Not Now or Jewish Voices for Peace. And you're just lumping every single Jewish people in with the actions of this rogue, genocidal government in Israel. Which is, it's more dangerous than any of these protests, by a mile. So we continue. We also have Senators Tom Cotton, Josh Hawley, calling to send in the National Guard to Columbia University. They want to send in the U.S. military to go crack down on essentially entirely peaceful student protesters. Okay? This is where we're at, guys. We have U.S. senators calling for the National Guard to be deployed against students, who again, even the NYPD, when they were arresting them, said were entirely peaceful. Okay? We also have, of course, the head of the ADL here, Anti-Defamation League, or as other people call it, the Apartheid Defense League. Here, Jonathan Greenblatt, who went to Colombia, apparently, and also called for the National Guard to be brought in. But he says something here early on that I just want to reference.
Jewish students don't feel safe on campus because they are not.
Okay, so let's just pause on this for a second here. A 700% increase in anti-Semitic incidents from last year. Now again, I'm not saying that there hasn't been any uptick in actual anti-Semitic hate crimes or incidents or otherwise in the US. That's definitely possible. But the reason I wanted to mention this is that if you actually go and look at the individual instances that the ADL lists as anti-Semitic, you'll find that a giant bulk that make up this 700% increase are literally just, there was a protest that took place here, and people used the chant "from the river to the sea." And that's the anti-Semitic incident. So here you have the ADL, which is supposed to be fighting against anti-Semitism, and they're doing the exact opposite of that. They are calling protesters who are out there like Jewish Voices for Peace and protesting against genocide, and they're lumping them in as an anti-Semitic incident. They're saying slogans that were chanted at a protest calling for Palestinian liberation are anti-Semitic incidents. So again, just blurring the line, diminishing the actual meaning of anti-Semitism. We also have this. Just amazing, guys. Here from the Washington Post, I believe, the opinion section here, Stephen Stalinsky. Who's behind the anti-Israel protests? Well, it's Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, as well as others, who are grooming activists in the US and across the West. So it couldn't possibly be that young people, people of any generation, people with a moral conscience, who have spent the last 6 months seeing Israel slaughter a bunch of innocent men, women, and children on our timelines every single day, relentlessly in a historic fashion. It couldn't have anything to do with that, right? That's not why the protests are happening. The protests are happening because people are anti-Semitic, and because Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis are basically grooming them into hating Israel. What the fuck are we doing, guys? What are we doing? We're Hamas, and now we're also the Houthis, and we're also Hezbollah. I mean, we're really putting together a resume here, right? Now, we also have this guy. I believe his name is pronounced Shai Dividai, okay? Who is a professor at Columbia University, who has been going around saying some of the most unhinged shit that I've ever seen in my entire life. I don't know what's going on in this guy's head. I don't know if he's going through some personal, emotional shit, but here he is comparing these protesters to terrorists, okay? Let's go ahead and watch this.
This is an important topic. This is not just about Columbia. This is every U.S. college. They have said that they are going to bring down Columbia first, and then as a domino effect, we'll have all other universities. But I want to make clear one thing before I talk about my own actions. What we're seeing now at Columbia, and I don't use this word lightly, we're not seeing ideological war. We're not seeing support for terrorism. We are seeing terrorism. Last night, we had at Columbia.
Okay, so he's not even, at this point, he's not even making the argument that, well, these people kind of support terrorism, right? And so therefore they're kind of complicit in it. He's just saying they're terrorists. Do you know what the meaning of the word terrorism is? Usually it involves violence directed at civilians for a political purpose, okay? He's talking about essentially overwhelmingly peaceful student protesters who are protesting for a ceasefire, okay? Who are protesting against their own university investing in companies that are complicit in apartheid and genocide. That's what they're protesting. That's what they're doing. And he's calling them terrorists. Terrorists, okay? As if we have, like, ISIS infiltrating our colleges and universities around this country. This is a professor at this school. I mean, just completely unhinged. Now, you know who agrees with him, right? Is the government of Israel. Now we have not only professors who are calling these protesters terrorists, okay? We also have the government of Israel. This is their official account here. I screenshotted it in case they ended up deleting it. A, terrorism is an ideology. They are openly supporting terror. They are terrorists. You have the government of Israel calling American student protesters who are overwhelmingly peaceful, who are overwhelmingly calling for an end to a war, and they're calling them terrorists. This is the government, this is the country we're sending tens of billions of dollars to. Shai later went on to also compare these protesters to Nazis, right? He's essentially saying, you know, who was taking over the universities in Berlin and Munich in the early 1930s? It was the early Nazis, right? That's what he's comparing these protesters to. We also have the financial aspect of this, which I think is important to note. Patriots owner Robert Kraft, this unhinged, you know, right-wing GOP donor, right, pulls support for Columbia amid virulent hate on campus. And so as pointed out here by Brandon, this is why it's so vital for these universities to crush dissent. They, like Columbia, pretend to be centers of learning, wisdom, and freedom. But the reality is Columbia has a $14 billion endowment and leaders who make 7 figures. The protests threaten that, and it's a business. And unfortunately, this is true. I mean, there are a lot of, you know, millions, potentially billions of dollars that are at stake right now. And so you have this added aspect that because of the financialization of our education system, that, you know, some random right-wing billionaire can come out and say, I'm just going to pull my funds from this university because I don't like that they're protesting against Israel, right? So this is another thing that I thought was important to flag. And then, of course, as all of this has been going on, over the last couple of months, we have had this McCarthyite-style Red Scare, you know, effort here by Republicans and many Democrats in Congress who have been bringing in the presidents of these universities to say the wildest shit you've ever heard in your entire life. I mean, this was one of the questions that was directed at the president of Columbia. This guy's from my home state of Georgia, unfortunately. And he literally said, like, are you aware of whatever chapter 12:3 of the Bible that says basically that anybody who blesses Israel, I think the actual translation, somebody pointed this out to me in the comments, actually says Abraham, so I think they're misusing the quote. But their interpretation is like, in the Bible it says that anybody who blesses Israel will be blessed, and anybody who curses Israel will be cursed. Do you want Columbia University to be cursed? This is an actual question, guys. We have elected members of Congress calling for the National Guard to be deployed against student protesters, and we have members of Congress who are coming out and asking about biblical curses. Biblical fucking curses, guys. So there you go. I mean, this is where we're at, guys. It's genuinely insane to watch all of this unfold in real time. You know, there are historic parallels to this. Protests by students against the Vietnam War, for example, is a big one that's been brought up. I think actually at Columbia University specifically, they had a massive police crackdown against anti-war protesters decades ago. So it's not like this hasn't happened before, but it's genuinely insane to watch this all happen as an adult, you know, in real time in front of you. You know, you have the U.S. government fully complicit in arming and funding a genocide and an ethnic cleansing, passing billions of dollars to go to this country. And then you have young people, protesters, people all across the country, not just at university campuses, who take to the streets, who put themselves on the line, who risk their futures to try to stand up against that. And you have this massive police crackdown, university crackdown, financial crackdown, government crackdown, and a witch hunt to try to smear anybody who dares to criticize a foreign country complicit in all of these things as being rabidly anti-Semitic. So, I mean, there you go, guys. I'll try to end off the video here, 28 minutes, pretty long one. Thank you to anybody who stuck around. Remember to like, comment, subscribe so I can keep making this kind of content for you guys. And yeah, I mean, hopefully some of these protests actually end up getting through, right? I hope that these people are unrelenting. I hope that nobody bows down. Credit to all of these protesters who have been organizing this, the faculty, the staff, everybody who has been going and making life extremely uncomfortable for the people in this country who actually...
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying